This is a million miles away from where we were under Boris Johnson, where there was simply
Is it though,
no
really? Could you not just
accountability.
explicitly say if a minister has broken the ministerial code, they'll be sacked?
Well,
And you're not saying that.
That's the UK Prime Minister refusing to say whether the Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary Angela Rayner should have to go, lose her job, if she is found to have broken the ministerial code after admitting that she didn't pay enough tax on a property that she bought. But what is the ministerial code and how much trouble could the government be in? That's what we're going to discuss on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's James in Glasgow.
And it's Chris in Glasgow.
Yes. No, I was thinking that's
I'm so
funny,
used.
but
I
here we
still
are.
nearly said in Westminster.
Well, yes.
You know, but no. It's
Here
great.
you are. And later in this episode, you'll hear Alex Forsyth and me chatting to Zack Polanski, the new leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. But first, Chris, why is the Prime Minister, and by extension you, I'm not suggesting you're an extension of the Prime Minister,
But I spend a fair amount of time following him around. So yeah.
trailing him around, why are you both here in Glasgow?
So he wanted to, if you like, as I think as Downing Street saw it, get enough sort of news bang for its buck for this deal that's been done between the British government and its Norwegian counterparts for the building of warships on the Clyde in Glasgow. Now, this was announced on Sunday, and it made news on Sunday, but it is a big deal. I mean, in genuine news terms, with my sort of journalist's hat on, it was quite a news story. If you're a prime minister, it's a great story to go and talk about because it's kind of unalloyed good news economically, a sense of winning an international race for these contracts, particularly important for the economy of this part of Scotland and the wider supply chain. So I think he felt like he wanted to get a bit more bang for his buck out of that, and then also do something, not away from the gaze of us journalistically, but on top of that, which is meeting the workers. So, he went in, I followed him into the canteen, and he kind of acknowledged, you probably want to talk amongst yourself whilst you're having a bit of a lunch break, not listening to a politician droning on. But he was doing the whole thing about, not only securing their future, their family's future, but their place in the UK's national security, but then also this £10 billion deal for the provision of these ships for Norway in the coming years. So that's why he was here, as well as wanting to talk about small boats and irregular migration. And then in the time between me being offered the chance to come and interview him and us deciding we would do it and all the rest of it, something else was happening.
Yes, the purpose was somewhat overshadowed by the story we were discussing on Wednesday's newscast, and indeed it's being discussed very widely across all media in the UK at the moment, that the Deputy Prime Minister and Housing Secretary Angela Rayner has admitted underpaying stamp duty, property tax, purchase tax, basically, on a property she bought in Hove in East Sussex. And Angela Rayner said that the, and I quote, mistake arose because of legal advice that she said did not properly take account of her complex situation, which involved a trust set up for her son who has special educational needs. And she's referred herself to the, I never get this right, Independent Advisor on Ministerial Standards.
Yeah, and that job title just curiously changed about 6 months ago, which is why it used to be about interests.
Oh, that's definitely
So
why
there
I
you
don't
are.
get it right.
There's your
That's my
excuse
get
for
out.
it.
Anyway, you spoke to the Prime Minister, and your key line of questioning was about that investigation and whether he would sack a minister who was found to have broken the ministerial code.
Yeah, because so why did it, when you do an interview like this, you think, right, how do I make the most of my sort of 7 or 8 minutes with the Prime Minister? And you're constantly thinking about what is he likely to say in answer to various questions that you might ask, and also what has he said in the past, including before he was Prime Minister, when ministers of a different political persuasion were in similar kind of
Pickles.
tangles. Yeah. Now, a Prime Minister with a process will usually defer to the process and say, oh, well, something's underway, let's wait for that. And you might say that's perfectly reasonable if you believe in due process, and arguably due process is part of our society's approach to so many things. That is reasonable. And he's asked Laurie Magnus, the parliamentary, the ministerial kind of ethics advisor, to look into this. Now, there are those, the Conservatives included, so you don't need to do that. Just look at what we know, and you could sack the Deputy Prime Minister, or she could resign. Anyway, the independent advisor is doing his work. The question I wanted to get to was not so much that. Let's wait for that conclusion. But if the advisor concludes that she has broken the ministerial code, the kind of rule book for behaviour as a minister, then would you keep her on in the job? And curiously, despite the fact that in the past that has been a bar he has set for others, he wouldn't say yes.
Well, we'll have a quick listen, but just before we do, how many times did you ask him?
Well, you know what?
This question?
I hadn't actually kept count, nor had I set myself a limit, but I did notice on one newspaper website there was a claim that it was 5.
Well, let's have a listen.
If Angela Rayner has broken the ministerial code, will you sack her?
Well, Angela Rayner has referred herself to the independent advisor. My experience is he will be comprehensive in the report that he gives me. He'll be quick. He will be quick. And that's what I'm expecting.
Next day or so?
Well, I can't say, but I think he will be quick. So I think that would be a good thing in this particular case. Obviously, I will look very carefully, as you'd expect, to whatever report he puts in front of me.
Aren't you equivocating here? You're sounding like Boris Johnson used to do. You can't answer the direct question of whether a minister who had broken the ministerial code, if that's the case, would be sacked.
Well, let me point out the key differences. Firstly, I strengthened the code and the role of the independent advisor. Secondly, I insist that if there's any issue, any minister refers themselves to the process that
and
I
what
have
about
enhanced.
thirdly, that if
And
there's
then-
a
and then-
conclusion
and
of a
then-
breach, that you sack the person?
Well, all I'm saying is he's doing his job now, and I need to let him finish that job. But this is a million miles away from where we were under Boris Johnson, where there was simply
Is it though,
no
really? Could you not just
accountability.
explicitly say, if a minister has broken the ministerial code, they'll be sacked?
Well,
And you're not saying that. 2 things to mention to newscasters on this. So, as the Prime Minister was saying there, we're going to get an answer pretty soon from this ethics advisor. And I think the Prime Minister will then offer his judgment on that recommendation pretty quickly, possibly on Friday, tomorrow. In other words, before the weekend. And for Keir Starmer, it's a nightmare because what's the plausible case he makes for her staying? Now, there might be a case depending on what this advisor concludes, but it won't be necessarily a particularly easy one for some to accept. And if she goes, under what circumstances, what does she then say and do, and who comes to replace her? And then also, crucially, does she volunteer to stand down as the deputy leader of the Labour Party, which she's directly elected to by the party members, as opposed to her government jobs that are in the gift of Keir Starmer, which is Housing Secretary for England and Deputy Prime Minister? And then the added little twist, we've just got an extra bit of detail, James, in the last few hours as we record it.
Is this when we were watching, right, sorry to interrupt, but we were watching the 6 o'clock news and you were on it and it seemed you'd really, there's a bit of like, I've just found that it did seem you'd really
No, well,
not
I really
long
had.
that
I mean,
information.
literally, as I walked out of BBC Scotland here to go and stand on the banks of the Clyde to do the live little report at the end of my report on the 6 o'clock news, one of our brilliant team, a guy called Billy Kembo, who's an outstanding journalist, texted me and said, we've got a statement from the conveyancing firm, the property firm, that handled the whole business of the transaction around the purchase of this flat in Hove. And this firm has said, we don't give tax advice and we don't deal with trusts. And they also say we acted in good faith and we acted on the basis of all of the information we were given. In other words, they are doing something to protect their own professional reputation, because one conclusion in all of this is that she was given duff advice, and they're saying, well, don't accuse us of duff advice. We acted in good faith and acted properly. Now, our understanding is there were a couple of other experts in trusts that Angela Rayner also consulted. Now, whether they
Lawyers
are,
or accountants?
we don't know, and they've picked their wording very carefully.
I noticed this morning people were saying she'd consulted people.
Yes.
Like,
So
what
that element
sort of
is,
people?
exactly. So that element of it is still unclear. But we've now had this conveyancing firm in the southeast of England, hired locally, saying what they've said. We've also had the firm that the Rayner family had hired for the establishment of the trust connected to the property in Ashton-under-Lyne, saying Angela Rayner is no longer a client of ours. In other words, we weren't involved in that advice. Because you've had this piecing together by journalists of who was involved in these transactions. And once it's become apparent that particular companies were involved, clearly they have a motivation to defend their reputation and say, well, hang on a minute, we've behaved exactly as we should have done, and on the basis of the information we were given, which on the face of it appears to make things more awkward for Angela Rayner. But we don't have the full picture, and the ethics advisor
it's
will.
going to come out. I suppose, not to dwell on this, but the central question here being, look, was Angela Rayner simply unlucky and she really tried hard to do the right thing and pay the right amount of tax, or did she not make enough effort and leave herself open to allegations of hypocrisy, especially as a housing minister? I mean, that's basically
basically it. And the Conservatives are now making the argument, and I've double checked this, and it's right, that if you sort of Google buying a second property if you've got a first property that's in a trust because of a child under the age of 18, it basically says pretty boldly, and it's not difficult to find, on gov.uk, the very website that the government of which she is the number 2 figure within hosts, that in that circumstance, the tax authority would regard the additional property as a second one. In other words, you'd be liable to the higher rate of the property tax.
Well, as you say, we're going to find out. We have, though, in the meantime, had a lot of messages from newscasters. Actually, interesting. It's one that seems to have touched off a lot of reactions on people I know on 5 Live. People were talking about today. Alex was talking to people in the streets today about it as well. And we've had loads of newscasters. So thank you very much for all your messages. And I'll just rattle through some of them. Helen, I don't agree with all her, as in Angela Rayner, obviously. I don't agree with all her political views, but we do have a certain admiration for her, and she seems to have been sold up the river. Angela, presumably not Rayner, the newscaster Angela, I mean, hello, Angela, said all the relevant information is on the gov.uk website, and it specifically indicates information about children.
It'd be a double bluff if it was Angela Rayner sending that message, wouldn't it?
It would. Roger emailed to say increased stamp duty in England and Wales is designed to deter second home ownership at the expense of provision for local needs in popular holiday destinations. Yet it's being used to also regard family provision for the disabled in the same light. This is nonsense. And Jill messaged to say, while I really empathise with Angela Rayner and completely understand why she and her ex-husband have set up a trust to protect their child's future interests, we have set up a trust in our wills for our younger daughter who has a serious mental illness for exactly the same reasons, to protect her future after we die. However, Jill says the reason for the trust being established is not relevant. The facts relating to the laws on stamp duty are what is central. And just to finish Jill's point, if she did make serious mistakes with her personal finances, what risks are there that she might make similar mistakes in her day job? So then you get someone's competence and their candour.
Completely.
And so on.
Completely. And when you see, as we have seen today, graffiti popping up in and around Hove where this flat is, and I'm not saying that this is representative of who knows how broadly this is a view that is held, but the motives and who they were and where they came from and all of that, in order to spray graffiti on various walls. Who knows if they're local? That's what I meant by that.
Yeah.
But people sufficiently passionate that they're painting things like Angela Rayner tax evader, and that's an allegation. Let's see. Let's see what is concluded. How viable is it for you to be a deputy prime minister when you're subject to that kind of thing?
And why do you think it is so touchy, this, with people? Is it because it's tax? Is it because stamp duty is particularly unpopular? Is it because she's the housing secretary? Is it because people are sick of the cost of living crisis or fed up with the government? I mean,
I think it's
a whole menu of options.
I think it's sort of all of those things. It's understandable. I mean, I know it's quite complicated in its part, but it's ultimately about somebody admitting they didn't pay as much tax as they now acknowledge they should have done. So in that sense, it is understandable. The housing secretary in a pickle about housing, and then the deputy prime minister in a tax-raising government not paying enough tax, and that's her saying that. There is a flip side that I'm always conscious of if we take a step back from this particular case, which is the wider environment as a society, and then also for us as journalists, and particularly for someone like me in the business of daily political journalism, around the culture and the climate of debate and the extent to which that would be appealing for people to come into public life. Now, that's not for a second to condone someone who is found to have, should this be the case, wrongdoing or whatever. Neither should it ever stop legitimate scrutiny or indeed criticism from some of public figures who should be held to account. But there is a wider question about the extent to which the particular realities of seeking elected office, of course, come with high scrutiny, but would an outsider looking in who might aspire to high office and to want to run the country or be part of a party that seeks to win an election to run the country think that that is a rational course of action, when collectively you would want people to think that that's a noble calling? But I think to take several steps back from this particular case, that wider thought about the how appealing or otherwise public life might be I think is something that someone like me should always have in my mind.
Yeah. Now, on judgment, though, you mentioned judgment there, and judgment in politics. There's going to be potentially a question about the Prime Minister's judgment here. I mean, if the Prime Minister's backed her, Sir Keir Starmer has backed his deputy here, pretty much. And if she's found to have handled it in the wrong way, isn't that, I mean, how big of a trouble might he be in here? Or do you think it's not accurate to say he's backed her?
I think he's picked his words quite carefully. So one element of the story today, and we explored it in the conversation I had with him, was that on Monday, when he went on Matt Chorley's show on 5 Live, of course, we had Matt on Newscast. Yeah. Matt asked him about, is there a bit of a hounding of Angela Rayner? Is it somehow sexist or classist or whatever? And he mounted a very vigorous defence of Angela Rayner's character and saying how valuable she was within the government and the astonishing achievement given her backstory, becoming Deputy Prime Minister, etc., etc. And some said, hang on, but did he know more than he was letting on? Well, maybe he did, although we now know because I've asked him, but he wasn't actually asked. So on Monday, he wasn't actually asked, what do you know about the current circumstances and whether or not she has sought additional advice? Now, today I asked him that, and he said, well, at that time, he did know that Angela Rayner was now seeking extra advice, but he didn't yet know its conclusion. Mm-hmm. He says he only found that out on Wednesday, just before the rest of us did. So I don't think he has... Now, there's an argument. The Conservatives say, look, the Prime Minister's judgment is shaky because presented with the fact, as we know them now, he should sack her. His view is, well, we've got this guy who can do the due process and pull out all the bits of paper, and then we can come to a proper conclusion. And yet he wouldn't answer what was a theoretical question about, well, if he concludes she's broken the ministerial code, does that mean that she should resign or be sacked? So there's that bigger picture question of, should he have just blown her out the door, as the Conservatives say he should? I don't think he has necessarily, as far as her own conduct in the last few weeks is concerned, said anything that is a colossal hostage to fortune, because he's tended to cast his praise of her in broader terms, or acknowledging that it was a brave thing to do to ask for the lifting of the court injunction or whatever, as opposed to the particular decision-making process that she's made when interacting with a conveyancer or various specialists in different parts of this transaction she was involved in.
Chris, where are you going next?
We are going to Birmingham because it's the Reform conference, but I just wonder if I might end up being sidetracked whether to be developments involving the Deputy Prime Minister, but then I'll probably end up back in Birmingham after that. Well,
we'll see. And either way, we will be covering the Reform UK conference on Newscast. Chris, thank you very much. It's very nice to see you in person.
A joy to be here.
Now, as promised, on Wednesday, we had a chat with the new leader of the Green Party in England and Wales, Zack Polanski, and who better to join me for that chat than Alex Forsyth. So here is how our conversation with the new Green Party leader went. Hi, Alex.
Hi, James.
Now, as we mentioned on Tuesday's episode of Newscast, Zack Polanski is the new leader of the Green Party in England and Wales. And Alex, he won, I was going to say comfortably, but I mean, you could call it a stunning landslide, really, couldn't you?
Yeah, I think you could. I think there's probably a lot of people who would love to have won as well as Zack Polanski did. I was watching the press conference when they announced the winner of this contest, which has been quite a long contest for this Green Party leadership. And when the result was announced, Zack Polanski beat the other two candidates, who were Adrian Ramsey and Ellie Chowns, who were two Green MPs who were standing on a joint ticket. And he beat them so convincingly. I think he won 85% of the vote. He got like more than 20,000 votes to them getting about 3,700. And there was just like this huge cheer in the room. So it was this really convincing win after what has been quite a long and I would say hard fought leadership contest.
It's sort of North Korea levels of electoral victories, that. And Zack is with us now. Hello, Zack.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. No North Korea here, though. We're only doing democracy.
Yeah, well, that seems like probably a sensible approach. How did you celebrate on Tuesday night? Did you go out and have a good time?
I went to an amazing party last night. There was such a vibe. I do have to say, me dancing to Avril Lavigne got interrupted to go on Newsnight. But still, the energy in that room at the celebration was beautiful. It really felt like something momentous had happened. And Green Party members and lots of people there just really ready to turn the country around, but to have a good dance first.
And in doing that, you've talked about taking the fight to Labour. So do you see them as your real focus, your real competition?
Yeah, they're the government, and people in this country right now are exhausted and they're tired. They're working really long hours and their wages aren't increasing. Food prices are going up. And what are they doing about it? They're cutting two-child benefit cap, or they're keeping the two-child benefit cap. They're cutting disability benefits. People voted for them wanting change, and they've totally not offered that change. And we know there are other parties waiting to swoop in. So actually, the Green Party have a real responsibility to step up at this moment and deliver the real alternative. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about bold politics, which is being really clear about everything the Green Party stands for and, crucially, what we stand against. And I think people are really responding to that.
Zack, it really struck me when I was watching you give your acceptance speech after you won this contest. And you said one thing that did get a bit of a cheer in the room. You said that you didn't just want to challenge Labour, you wanted to replace them. So you're talking there as if, you want to be a serious party of government. Are you talking 2029? Do you think you can realistically be in that position where you go from 4 MPs to be a party of government that soon? And have you got the programme for it?
Well, I'm actually talking about this May. So in London, we have huge elections alongside Birmingham, South Tyneside. And we already know from the by-elections that are happening week in, week out, that Labour seats are flipping green. We also have the Wales elections also in May. They're going to be one of my first priorities to make sure that we do get Greens on the Senate. I think all of this points to the fact that people want change in this country, but I'm not even going to wait until next May. We know right now that Keir Starmer is terrified of losing votes and seats to the Reform Party. I want to flip that around so he's much more worried about losing seats to the Green Party.
Is there anything you can learn, though, from Nigel Farage's relative success in some respects?
I think there's absolutely loads. So look, I despise Nigel Farage's politics, and that's important to say. But what he does do very well is he communicates. In the Green Party and on the left more broadly, we often get lost in spreadsheets and graphs. Now, they're really important at the beginning of the process because you need to be talking about facts and science, but you can't stop there. You need to also have emotive stories, stories that people can see themselves in the heart of, stories about how we can make sure we're protecting people's rights at work, that we're tackling the climate crisis, that we're protecting nature, that we're nationalising the water companies. Right now, we are pumping sewage into the water, or rather the water companies are, I'm not, pumping sewage into the water and then charging us extra for the privilege. This is outrageous. And I think it's these stories and these messages that we know are very popular among the public. The problem in the past has been that people think the Green Party just stands for the environment. The environment's really important. That's never going to change for the party. But they don't know about our plans to lower bills, to reduce inequality and tackle the cost of living.
It's interesting. I mean, if Adam were here, he'd pick you up on saying spreadsheets and graphs because he loves them. But it is interesting, the point that you make, because this leadership contest, I mean, I don't know if people are familiar with how the Green Party works, but this wasn't really about policy, because obviously the policy in the Green Party is largely set by the members. It was a lot about communication and style. So do you think that in the past, previous Green Party leaders and the party more broadly has focused too much on green issues, on climate, on the environment, to the exclusion of everything else? Are you going to talk less about climate now?
I think you're right, first of all, that this election was almost entirely about communication. In fact, in many of the hustings, one of the first things myself and my fellow MPs would say is this election is not really about policy, because Green Party members decide that. It's about how we cut through and communicate to the public. And I do think it's fair to say that when I get out and about, which I do a lot, people often say to me, oh, I really like the Green Party. It's really important that we recycle. And I go, well, first of all, rather than recycling, let's reduce our consumption. That's a really important thing to say. And this isn't about individual responsibility. This is about system change. If we're going to tackle the climate crisis, we need businesses and government to be doing the right things. But it's even bigger than that. You cannot tackle the climate crisis without tackling inequality. It is corporations that are destroying our environment, they're destroying our communities, and they're destroying our democracy. So I don't see environmental justice or social justice as two different things. They are inextricably linked. And what's really important is we're telling powerful stories so people really get that and they really feel it in their heart.
How do you get economic growth, which many people, including this government and lots of economists, think that the economy needs if we're to fund public services, if you're in the business of reducing consumption? Or do you reject the idea that we actually need growth?
Well, it depends what exactly you mean by economic growth, and I'll explain what I mean by that and hopefully answer your question directly. So very often we're measuring GDP. Even the person who designed the concept of GDP says this is a terrible way to measure the health and well-being of a nation. We should be talking much more about people's mental health, the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap, the disability pay gap. Do we have cohesive communities? Do people feel like they have purpose in their lives? I think there's lots of other things we need to be measuring.
That doesn't persuade the money markets to lend anything to you, though, does it?
Well, I've got no interest in the money markets. My interest right now is in people who are homeless on the street, people who are running our food banks, people who are really struggling. Now, that doesn't mean antagonizing the money markets. It just means it's not the first place to go. But if we want to keep the money markets happy too, I don't think these things are in opposition. What we need to do is invest in our public services, because having a broken NHS that is crumbling is really bad for our economy, because it means people are sick, they're off work, they're not able to go to work. Now, I don't want to protect the NHS because I just want to see economic growth for its own sake. I want to have a healthy nation. But actually having a healthy nation is good for economic growth, and that's a great byproduct. To give you another example, we live in one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. If we destroy that nature, it might be great for economic growth if you're building luxury apartments that are completely unaffordable that no one's living in. That's a disaster. But actually, if you're building council homes and you're making sure there's actual places for people to live in that are good standards, that are there where you're building community cohesion, all of that is going to be happier communities. We know happier communities are much more likely to be productive, much more likely to run businesses. Again, that's not the point of it. The point of it is to have a productive community or the happy community. So I think this question of economic growth is so much more nuanced than Keir Starmer gives it credit for. And what I would say this Prime Minister is doing, which is a disaster, and it's a deeply ironic disaster, is he's laid everything on economic growth. It's looking at 1.2%. It's pretty grim. And he's laid everything, or Rachel Reeves has certainly, on keeping the markets happy. And the markets and the businesses are really unhappy with them. So whatever measure you measure this government at, they're failing. But really, I only have two vested interests in the Green Party. I want to protect people and I want to protect planet. And when you're really, really clear about that, when that's the aim in everything you do, you can be clear, you can be honest, and you can be bold because you've got nothing to hide.
Here's the thing, you would have heard this already, and I've listened to you do a lot, and you have done a lot of interviews since you won that leadership contest. So thanks for doing this one as well. But here is the thing. You know that you are not the only party who is saying quite similar things, or movement, we might call them now. There's another kind of new kid on the block in Zarah, Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, who are looking to, in kind of simplistic terms, but take the fight to Labour from the left, if you like. I know that they're not a properly formed party yet, that they're going through the process, that they're going to work out their name and the structure and all the rest of it. But it seems to me, from everything I've heard you said, you're pretty clear that you are totally prepared to work with Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana, because you must recognise that if you don't, the big risk is that you split the vote on the left, right?
Right. So the first thing I'd say is I've done lots of interviews, and don't tell the others, but I'm really excited to be on Newscast. So thanks for thanking me for being on here, but it feels really, really exciting to be on here. I've also, I'm going to plug in now, just launched my own podcast, which I'm not competing with you. You still need to listen to Newscast, but it's called Bold Politics. It's going to be a weekly show. I've just launched a first episode with Ash Sarkar. Now, to come to your question directly, I really admire Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana. I admire their politics. And actually, I think this is a moment for a new politics. Just a few years ago, you would have expected a politician from a different party or a different movement to be looking instantly for what are the wedge issues, what are our differences, how can we compete? And actually, I think people are really, really over that. And actually, what they want to see is cooperation. And anyone who wants to challenge this failing Labour government and take the fight to reform is someone I want to work with. Now, what does want to work with mean? That's the next question. And I wish I could give you a clearer answer on that, because as journalists, I know you want absolute clarity. But the truth is, if we don't know what they are or who they are, It's completely impossible to say that. So I do have red lines. So, for instance, if they wanted to work with George Galloway, that would be up to them, but that wouldn't be a movement I would want to take the Green Party into. It's also really important to be clear, it's not my decision. It is the democratic decision of the members. And of course, I'll have an opinion, and I hope with an 84% vote, my opinion will be heard and that will be considered. But actually, what I love about our party is it is totally democratic. And I think we're up for this really exciting moment where we'll have this democratic conversation in public, and then whatever Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana's movement is, they'll have a conversation in public too. My very central aim right now is to grow the Green Party. I've just been elected as the leader. We have 39 places where we came in second place to the Labour government. My first and central mission is to flip those to first and turn the 2 million votes, or the nearly 2 million votes we got at the last election, to many more votes at the next general election.
Have you always talked this fast?
I talk faster. So I've spent a lot of time after interviews with people going, what you said was brilliant, but you could slow a little bit down. And I always think I want people to think faster. I think as long as you can talk fast, but with clarity, I actually think far too many politicians take ages to get to the point, and then they don't even have a point. So why don't we talk with speed, with clarity, and make sure we get our point across with passion?
Well, and on the subject of that, we're talking about podcasting and everything, and that you're the only podcast led by a current party leader in the UK is how you're billing yourself. I mean, is this, and just as a journalist, is there a concern here that the future is politicians just trying to bypass scrutiny, just to talk directly without being asked questions, without answering difficult questions, without being scrutinised by the media?
I have a huge concern about that. And being really honest, it's something I really considered when setting up this podcast. But let me look at the other side of this. Nigel Farage uses TikTok. He has more followers than every single MP in the House of Commons combined. He would say he gets scrutinised, but he goes on GB News, which we know absolutely are bankrolled by multimillionaires and billionaires, and is essentially a propaganda channel for reform. Now, no one's offering the Green Party that kind of money, and to be honest, we would not take it. We're funded by small donations by our members. But I think setting up a podcast is one way of me saying, let's set the political conversation. However, I will absolutely come on Newscast anytime you ask me. I won't name competitors, but I'm very happy to be scrutinised. More than that, I welcome the scrutiny. I don't know if there's something wrong with me, but I actually find it quite fun. These are really serious issues that we're talking about, but I think the conversations about British politics and the excitement there is right now, particularly around the Green Left, is something I want to talk about anytime, particularly with people who disagree with me. So yes, the podcast is there for me to help set the agenda, to help set a national conversation and give particularly marginalised voices a platform and a voice to say their thing. But you're absolutely right. As a politician, both in the London Assembly, I'm elected there, for Londoners and across the country, now as the leader of the Green Party, it's absolutely right that I'm held accountable and I answer to scrutiny.
And I'm sure GB News would deny that they are propaganda. I'm sure they would say they're subject to the Ofcom regulations. I'm just saying these things to get them on the record. I'm not asking you necessarily to respond to them. Alex, sorry, I interrupted you.
Can you be really clear? What is eco-populism?
Eco-populism is recognising that if people are worried about putting food on the table, heat in their homes, getting to work, or if they can sustain a job, talking about anything else, like the climate crisis, can feel very distant to them, even though we know the climate crisis is right here and right now. So the way to connect to people's everyday concerns is to talk about lowering bills, the cost of living crisis, the rise in food and basics, and ultimately make sure that people know we have solutions to their everyday needs.
And can I also ask you, I said at the very beginning that this was quite a hard-fought leadership contest, and there were some moments within the campaign. I'm thinking of one that's been rolled out on the TV cameras subsequently, when you and Adrian Ramsey, who was obviously one of the people standing against you, were sat next to each other, and he was asked if he liked you. And he talked about working well with you, I think, but he didn't say he liked you. What was that campaign like on the inside? And when you have those moments during a campaign, how do you then get past them? Because you are now the leader of the Green Party, big mandate, won by a long way, but you've got 4 MPs who sit in Parliament and you're not among them.
So the moment was totally cringe for me, just on a personal level. I mean, I never want someone to say that they don't like me. And I know that there will be people who don't like me. And as a politician, you get on with that. But with colleagues, you always want to kind of get on a friendly level. But I really think professionally is what people care about. And Adrian was the former co-leader for the last 3 or 4 years. I've been his deputy leader. There have been plenty of times that we have disagreed and we have got on with the job. We've done it respectfully and collegiately, and then we've got out there as a united team. And in fact, we've had the best election results in the Green Party history.
But do you like each other? Do you actually like each other?
I like Adrian. Adrian is still refusing to answer if he likes me. I think he eventually conceded to it. But the point is, I don't need to go down to the pub and have a pint with a colleague. What I need to know with a colleague is, do we have each other's back? Do we work well together? Do we work collegiately together? And I can say hand on heart, all of those things are true with Adrian. Would I love a mate I can go to the dance floor with? Well, I'm going to have to take Ellie Chowns because I'm not sure that's Adrian's bag.
Isn't it possible that one of the reasons that people might not like you is because of these comments you made as a hypnotherapist when you claimed you could help a woman who was a reporter boost the size of her breasts through the power of thought? What's that all about?
Quite. So, first of all, it's important that it was a reporter. So this was her idea. I wasn't a politician. It was 12 years ago. The article was written and it absolutely didn't represent me. And so I went out on BBC News the next day on the radio and apologised for the comments and said, this doesn't represent me.
Why did you do it then?
Because at the time, a Sun journalist approached me. I was naive. It sounded fun. It sounded exciting. And I was a theatre actor. And it just kind of fitted in with some of the other bizarre jobs I was doing. I was also, by the way, no one's found this yet, dressed as a chicken, stood in Leicester Square, giving out promotional crisps. So, I was doing lots of jobs as a theatre actor where I wasn't working in theatre, but actually I was hustling to earn a living. And I think lots of people in this country will identify with the fact that people who have got into politics haven't always been politicians. And I do think that is a unique thing that we need in politics. But one of my favourite politicians, Tony Benn, has an amazing phrase, which is, I don't care where you came from, I care where you're going. And what I really want people to focus on, and I hope I will win people over on in the course of time, is the fact that I'm standing up for marginalised people. In fact, when I was elected yesterday, the first thing I did was went to the United Voices of the World. This is a migrants' union. And that was a statement of intent. Because actually, if we amplify the voices of the people who are finding life hardest right now, that actually improves the lives for every single person in this country. And tackling inequality has to be at the heart of everything we do. So yes, silly comments, embarrassing comments. I've apologised for them and moved on. Oh, and one last thing though. I was amazed and slightly delighted when the first thing that happened when I was elected is that the party of government put out a tweet attacking me for this petty story 11 or 12 years ago. I tweeted out today or X'd out today to say, yes, I've made mistakes in the past that I've apologised for, but I'm not arming a genocide. And although I'm being slightly trivial about that for something so serious, I think the point is really true. How dare this government point to people who have had lives in the past and apologised and moved on and now doing good for the country and working for social purpose at the same time as they are doing pretty shocking and embarrassing things every single day that they are not only not apologising for, they're actually getting worse on.
I should say, and I say this because obviously we're talking to you as a Green Party leader, but you just said something about government. I should say what the government's position is when it comes to arms exports, where they say that they have suspended, I think it's 30 out of 350 arms exports to Israel, that they said that they thought that they were at risk of breaching international law about. I just feel like it's fair to state the government's position given what you said, but just on the point.
Totally fair, but I do want to respond that we have David Lammy and Keir Starmer regularly saying that they want a ceasefire, regularly making sad faces and shrugging about the atrocities, but still the fact they're still sharing arms at all, the fact that they're sharing intelligence is absolutely despicable. And I don't think this is a unique or nuanced position. I think when you speak to the majority of the public, in fact, polling shows this over and over again, people are shocked and disgusted by what is happening in Gaza.
Israel would deny it's committing genocide in the Palestinian territories, and I accept that you disagree with that position.
One sort of final thought on that you said you made those comments, you apologised for them. They were, I think you said 10 or 11 years ago. But there was one thing that came up in the campaign where there were some people in the party or who were worried that you as the leader might end up alienating politically some people who might not take as strong a position as you on some things. So I'm thinking about the fact the Green Party has attracted a lot of perhaps former Conservative voters or has been targeting seats with our former Conservative voters. And there was a question about whether or not you and your bold, as you call it, style of politics and the straight talking, as you say it, and the clear get to the point messaging actually might alienate some of those voters who flirted with the idea of the Greens.
Well, what I'd say to them, and they know this, is that inequality hurts you wherever you live, whether you live in a town, a village, a city, or the countryside. People need to change the relationship with power. And what I mean by that is if you live in a city like Manchester or Birmingham, you might be a renter who badly needs rent controls to fix the broken housing market. But if you live in the country and you're a farmer, for instance, 80% of subsidies are going to the wealthiest 20% of landowners, but actually tenant farmers are being screwed over by the supermarkets who aren't paying them properly for their work, and they're vital for our food security and the future of this country. So actually, it's not just me that says this. My deputy leader, Rachel Millward, who shares the leadership of running Wealdon Council, has said that she is really clear that my vision of the party is exactly what rural communities need in this country. So I sometimes think, in fact, I know, that it gets overplayed, this idea that there's some split between urban and rural seats. Actually, when you go knocking on doors, people are people, and they largely care about the same things.
Well, it's really interesting to hear from you. Thank you very much for taking the time. As what Alex says, is a very long series of interviews. So thank you very much for talking to us.
Thanks so much for having me. I loved it.
So that was Zack Polanski, new leader of the Green Party in England and Wales. And I assume he's gone before I ask you, Alex. I was going to say, what did you think? But he has gone. He's gone. Yes, he's gone. Now we can talk about him. What did you think of that?
I mean, I think what's fascinating about this is that the Green Party's changed their leaders quite a lot, because obviously a big part of what the party prides itself on is this sort of democratic internal processes where the membership want to be really involved. So they have leadership contests fairly frequently. This one does feel quite different and potentially quite a pivotal moment for the party. And I think it's because of what Zack Polanski was saying there. He's clearly coming in with a completely different style. You know, he said himself that he wants to look at what Nigel Farage does, not in terms of politics, but in terms of communicating and messaging and somehow getting out there to people the message of your party, and kind of emulate a little bit of that. It's quite a different approach for the Green Party. And he won a resounding victory in that leadership contest. There's absolutely no doubting that at all. But obviously now it's kind of how that then gels, how he settles in to a party that's had traditionally quite a different approach to things. And I also think what is going to be significant is what he was talking about what happens with the Jeremy Corbyn, Zarah Sultana movement stroke party. Because obviously the danger for the Green Party and for Jeremy Corbyn, Zarah Sultana, is that they do end up sort of splitting the vote on the left. I always hate putting it like that because it's quite a sort of obvious way of saying it. But in the broadest terms, that's the kind of risk for them. It's really clear that Zack Polanski's up for working with Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana in some format. I think it'll be fascinating to see how all of that bears out and what influence, if any, all of this does ultimately end up having on Keir Starmer's Labour Party.
Yeah, I think you're right, Alex. I think it really will be. It's very nice to see you.
Great to see you, James.